With Arizona called last night, Donald Trump swept all 7 swing states. 6 of them flipped from Joe Biden's column in 2020. So far, the president-elect has won just over 50% of the popular vote, and he made gains in key demographics, including the young, Latinos, and women. Republicans took the Senate and are on track to control the House. Tuesday, more than 80% of all the nation's counties move toward the right. The shift is decisive and leaves Democrats arguing over how they misread the people. To understand what just happened, we went to Pennsylvania, one of the places that made all the difference.
The story will continue in a moment.
Political pilgrims seeking a vision of the future travel to Bethlehem.
We're in Bethlehem, which is the heart of Northampton County in eastern Pennsylvania, a county along the Delaware River. Mid-size, couple 100,000 people, mix of urban, suburban, rural areas, all in a pretty centered location here in eastern Pennsylvania.
And pretty perfect for picking presidents. For 25 years, Chris Borick has been conducting one of the leading polls of Pennsylvania voters. He's a professor of political science at Muhlenberg College, next to Northampton County.
It was an Obama county, then it was a Trump county, then it was a Biden county, and in 2024, it once again is a Trump county.
How did Trump win?
It's a great question. First of all, I think he had the winds on his side here from talking to voters. They're not in a great mood. They're not in a good place. There's lots of good things happening in Northampton County. The economy's good, but they're feeling things in their lives that really trouble them. Housing prices here, grocery prices. I can't tell you how many times when I've talked to people about elections this year, they referenced eggs and the price of eggs.
Egg prices doubled and featured on the menu of discontent. At the Nazareth Diner near Bethlehem, no one sees a sunny side to inflation, high interest rates, and housing prices. The average tab here in 2020 was $24. Now it's $38. And that's the election in an eggshell.
The prices have went up, obviously, because the food cost. And for a family of like 4 people, 5 people, I have them come in and say, oh my God, I spent $100 with the tip for breakfast? That's crazy. Which it is. Yeah, 7:30 we open, 7:30 to 10. Yeah.
Roz Werkheiser was a waitress 25 years ago. Now she runs the place.
My mother used to always say, gotta vote Democrat, they're for the poor people.
You grew up in a Democratic household?
Yes.
But you just voted for Donald Trump?
Yes.
Inflation is down by more than half. Interest rates are falling, mortgage rates are falling, wages are going up. Are you not feeling that?
I don't feel it. No, I don't feel it. I don't feel it at all. Everybody I talked to, nobody's wages went up. But we had 4 years of this. 4 years. Gas was super high. Yes, it just went down now, but the past 3.5 years it was up.
The party in power is going to get blamed by a certain portion of the electorate for economic conditions that they don't like. And sometimes it's just as simple as that.
Anthony Salvanto is CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys. Who were the Trump voters?
People who believed that things would be better, them being better financially, under Donald Trump, in large measure because they recalled a time before the pandemic when they said the economy was good. And that's how they were benchmarking their financial comparison. Number 2, don't forget about the MAGA base. There's the Republican base, and then there's the MAGA base within the Republican Party. These folks have a very personal connection to Donald Trump. Many of them turn out to vote just because he is on the ticket.
Trump swept the swing states, but narrowly, about 1% in Michigan, about 2% in Georgia and Pennsylvania. Does this election represent a major realignment of the American electorate, or is it just an election with its own issues?
I think it's a shift, but it's an important one, and not just in the battleground states, but in places like counties in New York, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania. And I think it also speaks to the kinds of changes in constituencies that we saw. Democrats didn't do as well, Republicans did better, among young voters, among Latino voters.
The historic support that Donald Trump got from the Latino community has been building over a series of election cycles.
Leslie Sanchez is a Republican political analyst and contributor to CBS News. What did you see on election night in terms of Latino support for Republicans all across the country?
You have second and third generation Latino families who are living now in the middle class, working class families, very sensitive to inflation and prices, and very sensitive in their communities to an open border. Those two pressures together created a community that wanted change, and they fundamentally felt, if you talked to them, that the Democratic Party had left them.
Donald Trump's Election Day support among Latinos jumped 14 points.
You voted for whom?
I voted for Donald Trump.
Latinos are 20% of the U.S. population now and the fastest growing community in Northampton County, Pennsylvania. Ronald Corrales opened a barber shop 12 years ago, then a second, now a third. Some of his 20 employees changed their minds about Republicans for the first time.
Democrats would have expected to do really well with Latino voters.
Yes.
Donald Trump made a lot of inroads
Yes.
in this election, and I wonder why you think that is.
The economy. The economy. I've been talking over the past couple of years to like people at one point, they were like so against him because of the comments or whatever the media was saying. But you know, a lot of the Latinos are working class people. They have families. You know, they help their families even outside the country as well.
Corrales' late father immigrated from Peru in 1985 and was so thrilled to be in America, he named his son for the president. Today, Ronald finds some common ground with Trump, even on immigration.
We still need immigration, but if we could do it the legal way, and hopefully President Trump will bring some kind of legalization to these immigrants, because there's still a lot of good people out there that they're willing to work and continue dreaming with the American dream.
Speaking to families that live along the U.S.-Mexico border, this has been a cultural and economic relationship on the frontera, like right there in the border area for over 100 years. But it no longer is balanced. This flood of migrants coming across, they feel that it's lawlessness. It's putting tremendous pressure on Border Patrol, first responders, and their families and their municipalities.
Did Democrats take Latinos for granted?
Absolutely. I would think the party of my parents, the party of my grandparents, just assumed that Latinos, you know, as the community grew and our population grew, that we would just naturally fall in line with the Democratic Party. And in the last 10 years, about 10% more Hispanic Americans have moved into the middle class. They are much more sensitive to these economic issues. We live on the margins still. So small ripples in inflation really have a dramatic impact.
Do you think this is a lasting change beyond this election?
I would argue absolutely. So the question becomes, if Trump can really meet those promises, bring inflation down, make things more affordable, and make these families feel more financially secure, he's going to have an ally for probably several election cycles going forward.
When all the votes are counted, Vice President Harris is going to be several million votes short of where Joe Biden was in 2020. Why?
The Harris campaign lost the turnout game in many respects. We all knew going in that one of the keys here were people who don't always vote, new voters, people who skipped the election in 2020. The Trump campaign did a better job than the Harris campaign at turning them out. Those 2020 non-voters broke for Donald Trump.
And Harris's turnout failed even on an issue Democrats were sure would be compelling, one that helped them in the 2022 midterms.
They thought they would do better with women. They did not. They thought that the abortion issue would drive more people to the Harris side. It did not.
Another part of Harris's shortfall came after an advertising blitz targeting her support for transgender rights. Republicans spent $143 million on the transgender campaign to cast Democrats as out of touch.
The party as a whole spends too much time in places like Washington and New York and Chicago and doesn't really spend time listening to people like my constituents.
Democrat Susan Wild is Northampton County's representative in Congress, and she's thinking about the Democratic losses.
If you are struggling to pay your rent or feed your kids, you don't have the privilege of thinking about things like LGBTQ rights. Unless you've got somebody in your own family that's personally affected, you don't have the luxury of thinking about reproductive rights. Unfortunately, I think our party needs to figure out that not everybody is just thinking about these very important social issues.
Wild has served since 2018, and Tuesday, she ran for a fourth term against Republican Ryan McKenzie. She lost by 1.2% to a Trump disciple who had insisted that the 2020 election was stolen. We have a picture of you from 2021, lying in the floor of the House chamber as Donald Trump's supporters were trying to smash their way in. And I'm curious, did you imagine in this election that January 6th or Trump's felony convictions would have been disqualifying in the minds of most voters?
Did I think it would change some people's minds? Yes, and I think it did. But I didn't think that was going to be the pivotal thing that would cost him this election.
Why not?
Back in 2021, I would have said there's no way he could ever run for president again. But over the last 3 years, I kind of assessed that it just wasn't going to be a disqualifier.
Why would Democrats not turn out in the numbers they had before?
I do think that there was a lack of enthusiasm about the top of the ticket. That part, I think a lot of us didn't gauge. And just thinking that people were going to turn out to vote against Donald Trump was a miscalculation.
Many Trump supporters told us they cringe at the things he says and the things he's done, but the economy, to them, is more urgent. And there's something more, a connection, an emotion, really, they find hard to put into words. Did you feel like he was someone you knew?
Yes.
Did you feel that he knew you?
I feel he knows the American people and the working class, yes.
The working class of the 20th century built Bethlehem into the second largest steel maker in the world. But today, the old mills are silent. Pennsylvania pollster Chris Borick told us a new economy and new politics are on the forefront of change.
It was such a democratic place for such a long time, and that Democratic Party doesn't exist. Those Democratic voters don't exist the way they long did in Northampton County. They have to revision what it's going to look like. Does that center on candidates? Does it center on issues? The answer is all of those things.